None of those who stood at the foot of the Great Pyramid at that time had any idea that something was hidden under their feet that could change the way people think about human history. In early 1954, when the Giza desert was breathing dry heat and the wind, soaked in dust, carried the smell of hot sand, a group of Egyptian archaeologists and British engineers began large-scale underground work. The purpose of the expedition was to explore unaccounted-for chambers and passageways, presumably leading to unknown burial halls, which were mentioned only in vague texts from the time of the Middle Kingdom. The funding came partly from the British Institute of Archaeology, partly from the American Foundation, under the guise of a scientific program, but even then, military advisors were present behind the scenes of the project, whose interests extended far beyond science. It all started with a small seismic anomalous signal. A void was fixed under the base of the pyramid, a space that was not marked on any map. Archaeologists thought it could be an unaccounted-for tomb corridor. However, the shape of the void in the seismograms was worrisome. It looked too regular, as if it had been geometrically adjusted. When the first workers began to clear the underground passage, they encountered rock so hard that the picks only left scratches on it. Then the engineers decided to use drills and drilling rigs, which had not previously been used in archaeological missions of this kind. 30 meters down, the temperature dropped noticeably, despite the desert climate outside. The air became denser, and it seemed that the walls of the tunnel absorbed the sound, absorbing even the distant blows of instruments. Some of the workers began to complain of ringing in their ears and a strange feeling of pressure in their skulls, as if there was a force underground that did not want to be disturbed. Soon, several people left the project, citing bad dreams. The management decided not to attach importance to this, blaming everything on stress and heat. At a depth of 42 meters, drilling encountered a layer of monolithic granite. Its structure was abnormal, unnaturally dense, without a single crack, as if the material had been processed under the influence of high temperature. British engineer William Carter, who led the technical part of the expedition, ordered drilling to continue. The process took almost a week. When the granite slab finally gave way, the workers found a narrow, perfectly straight passage leading into the unknown. Its walls gleamed under the lamplight, as if polished to a mirror. The air inside the passage was dry, but it smelled of ozone, an unnatural metallic scent that could not be confused with the smell of antiquity. Humidity was completely absent, as if a sterile environment had been maintained there for centuries. On the 5th day after the breakthrough, the archaeologists advanced several tens of meters and came across a massive door made up of 3 granite slabs. Each weighed at least 5 tons. But that wasn't the strangest thing. There were no tool marks or gaps at the joints of the slabs, as if they had fused together under the influence of some unknown pressure. After long meetings, the expedition leadership decided to open the passage, although many had a feeling that this could not be done. Several observers, young engineers, and local workers, claimed that as they approached the slabs, they heard a barely perceptible low rumble coming from the depths. Its frequency changed as people approached or moved away. The equipment detected something like a magnetic field, although the source could not be identified. The autopsy work lasted 3 days. At the moment when the last slab shifted with a strangled screech, the air from inside the chamber came out, as if exhaling thousands of years. The pressure changed abruptly, and the lamps on the archaeologists' helmets blinked for a moment. Behind the slabs, a room opened, whose outlines could not be explained by the usual logic of ancient Egyptian architecture. The walls, perfectly smooth and cold, sparkled with a faint blue sheen, as if reflecting their own glow. The ceiling was vaulted, but without any signs of joints. It seemed that the material had not been carved or built, it was solid, as if cast from an unknown alloy. In the middle of the chamber stood an object resembling a sarcophagus, but made not of stone, but of dark metal, the surface of which gently shimmered. He exuded a faint blue glow, faint but penetrating into the flesh itself. Lines of symbols ran along the edges of its body, unlike hieroglyphs, cuneiform script, or anything known to scientists. They seemed to flow over the surface, changing color depending on the angle of view. The archaeologists immediately realized that this was not just a tomb. It was something else, perhaps more ancient than anything they knew about human civilization. The next day, the facility was inspected and documented. Photographs and film footage captured every inch of the room. When Carter tried to touch the metal surface, the instruments detected a sharp surge in the electromagnetic field. The faint light intensified, illuminating the camera with a soft glow, as if an awakened being had opened its eyes. One of the engineers fell unconscious, the other felt sudden nausea and severe dizziness. For a moment, the sound in the room disappeared completely, and then there was a dry pop, like a distant thunderclap. On the same day, a group of military personnel arrived at the site. The Egyptian authorities quickly realized that the find could be of great importance. For several hours, the perimeter was cordoned off and access to the passage was restricted. All documentation has been seized and sealed. The project was renamed, unofficially it became known as Sector 13B. Several workers disappeared, and no one remembered them later. The chamber was drained, ventilation systems were installed, and pressure stabilization began. Internal sensors showed a strange phenomenon: temperature and humidity did not obey the laws of physics. There were faint fluctuations in the air in the center of the room, as if the space inside was shaking. When the light in the camera was turned off, the object continued to glow by itself, although the energy source was not found. Scientists from different countries tried to identify the metal, but samples taken from the surface turned out to be unstable. They disintegrated into tiny fragments under a microscope, evaporating without a trace. This property has baffled researchers. The Americans assumed that it was an unknown element, possibly synthetic, that did not exist in nature. The Egyptians insisted that this was an ancient artifact confirming the legends of the heavenly builders. In the following weeks, the device's behavior became increasingly strange. At night, a hum could be heard from under the pyramid, similar to the operation of a generator. Several observers reported that the light inside the camera changed from blue to purple, and the symbols on the surface began to move, as if reacting to the presence of people. The secrecy of the project has increased. All scientific documentation was classified, and the participants signed a non-disclosure agreement. Some of them soon disappeared. An Egyptian archaeologist was found dead in his Cairo apartment. The official version is a heart attack, but neighbors claimed they had heard screams and a rumbling sound coming from the walls the day before. Meanwhile, Carter began to keep a personal observation log, which recorded all the changes in the behavior of the object. He noted that the glow appears more often if there are living organisms nearby. Several times, he noticed that his watch began to rush as he approached the artifact. Time seemed to accelerate inside the camera, and then return to normal. These facts were alarming, but the military demanded further research. In mid-June 1954, an experiment was conducted. An engineer touched the surface of an object while holding a measuring device in his hand. The film, later seized by the security services, shows a bright light flashing at the moment of contact. The camera loses focus for a second, and when the image returns, the person has disappeared. All that remains on the floor is the device, red hot. After that, the project was immediately stopped. And all materials were transferred to closed archives. Within a few days, the site was completely filled in, access to the tunnel was prohibited, and all those who participated in the excavations were sent to different regions. In the reports, the mission was marked as completed without results. However, there were rumors among those who left Giza that something was still working underground. At night, if you listened closely, you could hear a faint vibrating sound, as if the giant heart under the stone was still beating, waiting to be woken up again. Carter disappeared later that year. His personal records were not found, but decades later, the archives mentioned a letter he sent to his colleague a week before his disappearance. In it he wrote, "It couldn't have been created by human hands. We have opened the door, but we do not understand which world it leads to. Every night I hear his call. And the longer it goes on, the less I am left." From the day the project was officially closed, silence seemed to reign around the pyramids. Tourists kept coming, the guide was told the same familiar legends, but there was a story under the surface of the sand that no one dared to speak out loud. An army guard stood behind the embankment hiding the filled-in tunnel. Even at night, the desert was not deserted, guard lights flickered among the dunes, and in the air, according to the locals, there was that low rumble that made the animals' fur stand on end. It's been a few months. The Egyptian government has officially announced that the work under the pyramid has not revealed anything of scientific interest. All documents, reports, and tapes were classified. But rumors began to spread in Cairo. Allegedly, one of the members of Carter's group managed to remove from the sector a small fragment of metal that had fallen off the artifact. He disappeared shortly after that. Burnt sheets of paper and traces of electric burns were found on the walls of his apartment, as if a powerful field had flashed inside the room for a second, which vaporized all life. At the military base where the artifacts were stored, the strangeness began. Several soldiers on duty at the storage facility complained of sounds similar to pulsating echoes coming from the container with the object. Engineers who examined the equipment recorded spontaneous temperature fluctuations, pressure surges and short-term magnetic pulses. Sometimes the devices started working on their own, giving out meaningless data on the scales. The authorities blamed everything on a malfunction of the equipment, but strange notes appeared more and more often in the logs of those on duty. A hum is heard, vibration is felt under the floor, the time on the clock does not match the control time. By December 1954, 8 of the 12 members of the primary group were still alive. One was found dead at his home in London. According to experts, death occurred from cardiac arrest, although doctors noted an unusual condition of the tissues. They were dehydrated, as if the body had undergone instant drying. 2 were missing, one died in a car accident, the circumstances of which have not been explained. The others tried not to recall the events under the pyramid. But the memory of her wouldn't let go. The CIA archive, which contained copies of the film footage, kept them classified as top secret. Those who watched the film later reported that under certain conditions, if you slow down the frames, for a split second you can see that the light flashes not just from energy, but as if it opened something like space, curved from the inside. In the middle of the flash, you can make out a silhouette, like a reflection of a figure, but devoid of human contours. After that, part of the film burned out, leaving a charred trail. Carter did not appear anywhere else. It was only years later that it became known that he might have been under surveillance by the U.S. military. His diaries have never been found, although it is known from some unofficial sources that before his disappearance he wrote letters to the British Embassy warning of an alien presence that, in his words, awakens in the depths of matter. Meanwhile, new Earth shifts were taking place in Egypt, in the Giza region. At night, locals noticed faint lights making their way through the sand at the foot of the pyramid. At first, this was attributed to guards and equipment, but later the military denied that anyone was at the facility at that time. Several witnesses described strange flashes, as if a pulse of light was shooting out from the depths, which, reaching the surface, immediately disappeared. After such flashes, the sand remained warm, and the air trembled as if over a fire. By the beginning of 1955, the rumors had become so persistent that the Egyptian authorities decided to completely fill up the underground passages and install concrete slabs. On paper, everything looked simple: filling, conservation, report. But there was talk among the engineers involved in the work. There was something underground that resisted. When heavy machinery dumped concrete into the passage, the operators heard a dull rumble, as if someone was knocking from under the slab. One of the drivers went crazy soon after, claiming that at night he dreamed of a shining hall and a voice calling his name. In May 1955, a new protocol appeared in the archives of the Egyptian Ministry of Defense. There was mention of a joint mission with the American side. The report used the term "structure of an anomalous nature." There was no word on the origin, but it was noted that the object continues to be active, despite the lack of access to air and light. According to military experts, the electromagnetic field was detected even through a layer of granite and concrete. This meant that the device, if it was what the archaeologists had found, had not stopped working. A few years later, the project was finally frozen. But everyone who has ever approached Sector 13B has noticed the same thing: the desert seemed alive at night. The stones underfoot barely vibrated, as if they were breathing. Sometimes, barely noticeable flashes of blue light flashed over the horizon, not like lightning or reflections. People tried not to look at where the pyramid stood. The secrets of this place continued to exist under the sand, but human curiosity did not fade. In the late 1960s, when the political situation made it possible to resume work, several Western researchers tried to gain access to the archives. They came across gaps, blurred pages, and destroyed negatives. But in one of the reports, there was a record of a certain secondary anomaly registered 10 years after the closure of the project. In the area of the pyramid, the instruments recorded magnetic disturbances, as if a huge power generator had turned on underground. Those who saw these reports claimed that the signature under them did not belong to Carter, but to someone else. Brown, an engineer who was formally listed as dead in 1954. His name disappeared from all the documents, but the handwriting matched. It is unknown who sent this data to the archive, but since then a new wave of rumors has begun. Someone from the mission survived and continued to observe the object. With each passing decade, the legend gained new details. It was said that there was not a tomb under the pyramid, but a vault. Not earthly, not human. That the metal from which the artifact was created could change the structure of matter. That the symbols on its surface are not just signs, but living fragments of information that react to consciousness. Some argued that it was from those times that strange bursts in the radio range began, recorded by stations on different continents. The signals were repeated periodically, as if something was trying to establish contact. But the strangest thing was that the military, who were on duty at the pyramids, from time to time reported sounds similar to breathing coming from underground. It wasn't the wind, the sound had a rhythm like a heart. Sometimes it was heard only by instruments, sometimes by people themselves. After such nights, the guards would get nosebleeds, their skin would turn cold, and their eyes would glaze over, as if they weren't exactly the ones who came down for their shift. By the end of the 1970s, the secrecy surrounding the project had reached its limits. All references to Sector 13B have been destroyed. But a letter of unknown origin, written on burnt paper, has been preserved in the archives of British intelligence. It said, "He's still breathing. Each cycle is closer. We thought we had him trapped under a rock, but the rock is just the flesh of the world. He will wake up when he hears his call." After that, the discovery was not mentioned for decades. The pyramid stood the same as it had thousands of years ago. But for those who once saw the blue glow at its base, this piece was just an illusion. Underground, in the silence and darkness, something continued to live, irrational and not biological, but still alive in a different sense. It remembered the touch of a human hand and, perhaps, was waiting for a new one. The sand, which seemed eternal, held not only the bones of ancient pharaohs, but also a secret whose awakening could destroy the very fabric of time. Since then, there has been a whisper among the night guards: if you put your ear to the ground at the foot of the pyramid, you can hear a hum that slowly matches your heartbeat. And the longer you listen, the harder it is to figure out where your pulse ends and where it begins. By the early 1980s, the memory of the events of 50 years ago was gradually fading into the shadow of official history, but the archaeological community could not completely forget the Giza anomalies. Young scientists interested in undocumented research tried to gain access to the archives, but all requests ran into the empty walls of the bureaucracy. Only a few indirect references came into the hands of independent researchers: records about Sector 13B, diagrams of underground passages, reports of strange magnetic and electromagnetic phenomena. None of the documents were complete, but each new copy increased the alarm. The artifact continued to show signs of activity. In 1982, a group of private researchers led by a British professor of archaeology and quantum field physics attempted to make direct contact with the archaeological site. They knew about the restricted access, but they had technologies that allowed them to study anomalies remotely: ground-penetrating radar, magnetometers, thermal imagers, and high-sensitivity electromagnetic sensors. Strange fluctuations were recorded for several nights. The metal, which was supposedly stabilized under layers of concrete and granite, continued to create radio frequency pulses, as if the object was trying to communicate something. In the same era, local residents began to record a number of strange incidents: rare cases of electric discharges in the desert, sudden flashes of blue light on the horizon, and a rumble that was felt in the chest stronger than the usual wind. Indirect observations showed that the anomaly under the pyramid seemed to have the property of interacting with human consciousness. Some who tried to observe its approach through instruments experienced temporary memory lapses, hallucinations, and nausea. In mid-1984, a private expedition was able to establish minimal contact through sensors. The camera under the pyramid reacted to the heart rate by changing the strength of the electromagnetic field. The experiment was conducted at a distance, but even from afar, observers noticed how the metal surface of the object flowed, changing its shape and light pattern. It was as if the artifact was reading not only biological signals, but also the emotional state of the people around it. One of the nights in the dungeon archive turned out to be particularly ominous. Sensors detected a sharp spike in activity, the hum became audible even on the surface, and local magnetic fields reached a voltage capable of disabling electronic devices. The professor who observed the results noted that the object showed a wave anomaly that instantly spread within the tunnel. All sensors detected a momentary disappearance of the field, as if the camera space had momentarily ceased to exist. Upon the expedition's return to Cairo, one of the participants suddenly disappeared. His personal belongings were found on the edge of the desert, but the man himself was missing. Only the device remained in place, covered with strange symbols that no one could decipher. Soon, similar disappearances occurred with two other members of the team, but government authorities officially classified these events as accidents in the desert. Documents related to repeated attempts to study the facility began to appear in the archives of the CIA and British intelligence. It said that the artifact is able to interact with temporal and spatial structures, and that direct contact with it leads to irreversible changes in the psyche. There was a suspicion that in the case of further experiments, anomalous zones might arise where the laws of physics would cease to apply. By the end of the decade, the situation had become critical. Several scientists and engineers who participated in the projects of the 1980s described cases of incomprehensible, synchronous perception. While observing the object, they had identical hallucinations, regardless of the distance between them. Some claimed to have seen an empty camera with a metal object emitting light, and at the same time felt the presence of someone else's mind watching them. Attempts to open access to the camera were again met with resistance from the military and government services. Over the years, the object has not been recovered. The deep layers of sand and concrete filling seem to be just a shell, not an obstacle. However, some observers claimed that the camera was waking up, the light became more intense, the hum could be heard at long distances, and the metal surface showed movements as if the object was not passive. In 1989, after a series of leaks and the loss of control over the observations, several private researchers tried to conduct a new operation. They recorded faint pulsations at the depth of the tunnel, but each contact was accompanied by instantaneous equipment failures and a feeling of irresistible pressure. Each time, the observers felt that the object felt their intentions. Some left the field of work with symptoms resembling post-traumatic stress disorder, insomnia, nightmares, panic attacks. Photocopies of the diaries of Carter and other researchers from the 1950s were preserved in the archives. Reading them, the new researchers noted that the object reacted not only to touch, but also to the thought of contact. In some cases, experiments have shown that light activity increased if a person focused their attention on an object. There was a feeling that the artifact was able to read the mental state. By the end of the 20th century, the legend of Sector 13B had become part of scientific folklore. Some believed that it was an ancient technological artifact, while others believed that it was a mystical object that did not obey human laws. But everyone who tried to approach the truth noted one thing: the object lives its own life, and every attempt to study it carries a deadly risk. The hum, pulsations, symbols, and light all indicated that what was under the pyramid could not be created by man and did not want to be disturbed. At the beginning of the 21st century, the pyramid's dungeons were once again the object of attention, although no one officially mentioned it. For decades, the archives remained closed, and any attempt to gain access to information was stopped instantly. But with the growth of computing capabilities and the emergence of private research groups, the situation has changed. New technologies made it possible to study underground anomalies remotely, minimizing the risk of direct contact. Laser scanners, highly sensitive magnetometers, infrared and radio frequency sensors, all this was aimed at understanding the nature of the object, which since the middle of the 20th century has frightened those who tried to approach the pyramid. By 2002, it became obvious that Sector 13B was not just an artifact. The instruments recorded regular pulsations coming from underground, which could not be explained by terrestrial energy sources. Magnetic fluctuations coincided with the biorhythms of people in the immediate vicinity, and electromagnetic bursts left incomprehensible patterns on the instrument screens, resembling a living structure. Sensors mounted on the surface showed that the object was capable of influencing the field at a distance sometimes exceeding several hundred meters. The locals started noticing the oddities again. In the evening, blue and purple lights flashed over the desert, and the wind carried the smell of ozone and metal. Those who stayed overnight near the pyramid noted that the sand under their feet vibrated slightly, and their hearts seemed to adjust to some kind of alien rhythm. People who happened to be too close lost consciousness or experienced hallucinations. They saw glittering halls, heard voices, and whispers resembling human voices, but devoid of concrete meaning. In 2005, one of the research groups decided to conduct a controlled experiment. They installed a complex of sensors around the perimeter of the pyramid and around the intended location of the camera to detect any change in activity. Night vision cameras, radio frequency detectors, infrared devices, everything worked synchronously. During the first 3 nights, there were faint flashes of light and a hum, but no drastic changes. However, on the 4th night, the object's activity reached its peak. Sensors detected an instantaneous surge in the magnetic field, light activity in the tunnel increased dramatically, and radio transmissions in the pyramid area began to emit strange signals similar to encoded sequences. By this time, the number of disappearances and deaths around research missions related to Sector 13B had become alarmingly high. The archives of recent decades have confirmed a pattern: those who tried to interact with the object directly did not return or returned mentally altered. Often their consciousness remained connected to the camera. Some who have experienced contact have claimed that the object is able to pull in consciousness, absorbing it and transferring it back to the altered ones. In 2008, one of the private expeditions decided to try using robotics for direct contact. A robot with pressure, temperature sensors, and a high-resolution camera was lowered through a tunnel leading to a backfilled chamber. As soon as the robot approached the metal object, the cameras recorded a sharp burst of light, and the electromagnetic field exceeded the normal range. Communication with the robot was lost for several seconds, and strange visual distortions appeared on the screens, lines resembling symbols that could only be seen on the metal surface in 1954. After that, the experiment was immediately stopped. But what was recorded confirmed a terrible hunch: the object has not only remained active for centuries, but also reacts to attempts at interference, which means it obeys its own laws. Soon, the first suggestions appeared that the artifact could affect the structure of time and consciousness at the same time. Since the early 2010s, the project has again attracted the attention of government and private entities. Using a combination of satellite observations, ground-penetrating radar, and infrared sensors, the researchers recorded regular cycles of activity. At night, the light inside the chamber became more intense, sometimes the radiation penetrated through the layers of concrete and sand to the surface, creating mysterious reflections on the horizon. Some employees started complaining of headaches, hallucinations, and loss of sense of time. In 2015, one of the expeditions managed to partially clear the tunnel, restoring direct access to the filled chamber. Observers described that the metal object seemed to breathe, the light changed rhythmically, the surface rippled, the symbols flashed and moved. Despite the use of remote technologies, the presence of people caused increased activity of the facility. One of the engineers noted that the light patterns created the impression of a living code that reacted to the brain waves of observers. This was the first case of direct human contact since the beginning of the 21st century. The researcher touched the surface of a metal object through a glove with sensors. At that moment, a bright blue light flashed, just like in 1954. For a moment, the space of the camera and the tunnel was distorted, and in the field of view of the observers there was a feeling that the object had absorbed the human consciousness, connecting it with the surrounding space. The signal from the sensors suddenly became impossible to decode, the data lines intertwined, creating strange characters that could not be read. After this incident, it was decided to completely block access to the camera. The concrete filling was increased, and the tunnel was blocked again. Nevertheless, sensors on the surface recorded activity, a faint hum, pulsations, fluctuations in the electromagnetic field, light flashes. People in the immediate vicinity noted the feeling of the presence of something alien, incomprehensible and ancient. The story of Sector 13B has received a new interpretation among researchers. The artifact is not just an object created by an unknown civilization. Some have suggested that it is a mechanism capable of interacting with space and time, reading consciousness, and changing the perception of reality. Others believe that it was a form of life, but not a biological one, but an energetic one enclosed in a material shell. By 2020, information about the location was completely hidden from the public. Scientists researching archives have noted that every attempt to describe an object leads to data distortion. The documents often came with blank pages, damaged photos, and missing frames. There was a feeling that the object was capable of influencing the information and memory of those who found out about it. A legend has formed among observers: anyone who looks at an artifact for too long begins to feel like a part of its space. People who tried to approach the camera in the 2000s told of strange dreams. They saw a space expanding endlessly, a metal object that glowed and moved, and around the symbols turned into languages that could not be deciphered. Those who experienced contact claimed that on the verge of consciousness they heard a voice, not human, but understandable, as if the object was trying to communicate directly. By the end of the story, one thing became clear: the object was not only alive, but also aware of the presence of people. It does not obey the laws of physics, time, and biology. Every attempt at intervention provokes his reaction, and the camera itself becomes a place where the material and non-material worlds intersect. The greatest minds of the 20th and 21st centuries who tried to study it either disappeared or returned changed, forever entangled in its unknown nature. Despite all efforts, the world has never learned the true nature of the find under the pyramid. The story of Sector 13B became a legend that existed on the border of science, mysticism, and fear. The pyramid still stood in its place, above the mystery hidden under the sand. At night, when the wind died down and the desert froze, a rumble could be heard. It was low, slow, but distinct, a reminder that something that couldn't be explained was still alive, watching, and waiting. Legend has it that if you listen to the sand at the foot of the pyramid, you can hear the rhythm of someone else's heart. It beats slowly, confidently, as if measuring time and space, as if reminding that humanity is only an observer in a world that is not created for its understanding. Every burst of light and every hum is a reminder that something ancient sleeps underground, defying the laws of our world. And as long as it's alive, no one can claim that we're really the masters of our own reality. Sector 13B remained closed forever, hidden under a layer of concrete and sand. But those who had experienced its anomalies knew that the object would never cease to function. He's waiting, watching, and maybe one day he'll wake up again. And when that happens, no one and nothing will be able to predict the consequences.